Shadow Minister for Foreign Affairs Penny Wong joined me for more on all of this a little earlier. Penny Wong, welcome.
Good to be with you, Patricia.
Just before we get to your portfolio, the Home Affairs Minister has confirmed that the government has cancelled the citizenship of terrorist Abdul Nasser Benbrika. What's your reaction to that decision? He's the first person to have his citizenship cancelled under the laws.
Well, the laws under which the citizenship has been cancelled are laws which were passed with Labor's support. In fact, I was on the Intelligence Committee at the time that we were dealing with some of those issues. Obviously, my colleague, Senator Keneally, will be seeking a briefing. I understand also from what the Minister said, the government continues to seek a continuing detention order for Mr Benbrika, which the Minister averted to in his announcement.
OK, so Labor supports this move by Peter Dutton. Obviously, this is a pretty significant issue. Are you concerned at all about the way that the government has handled this?
Look, I'll leave more detailed comment to my colleague, Senator Keneally, but I would say we did understand when we passed those laws through the Parliament that the cancellation of citizenship was a big step, but a necessary step in certain circumstances, and Mr Benbrika's activities and his conviction are well known to all of us, and that is why Labor supported the passage of that legislation.
Let's move to a few other issues. What are your concerns around former Finance Minister Matthias Corman being given the use of the RAAF jet for his campaign to become head of the OECD?
I was somewhat struck by Mr Morrison's double standard today when defending the use of the private jet. He said, it was because former Senator Corman might contract COVID if he used commercial options. I would make the point there are 36,000 Australians who are currently stranded as a result of border closures. They don't get this sort of treatment having a RAF jet. They are required to fly commercial, so I thought that double standard would be pretty hard to hear for some of those families whose relatives are in difficult circumstances, stuck outside Australia. I'd make this point. We've taken the view, a mature view as an opposition, that there is a national interest in having Australians in international institutions. It's a very different view to the pettiness that we saw when Kevin Rudd's candidacy for the UN Secretary-General was not supported by the coalition, including by Senator Corman. We think that was the wrong call, and we have taken a more mature approach and indicated we are supportive of his bid. But ultimately it is for the government to explain the costs, the use of the plane and all the costs associated with this bid.
OK. You say that you took a more mature response, but also that it's double standards. So does that mean that on balance you accept the government's argument that he couldn't use commercial planes because of the risk of COVID-19?
Well, come on. No, you know what? I don't accept the fact that the Prime Minister promised to get 36,000 Australians home by Christmas, at which he is clearly not going to do. Yet another Scott Morrison announcement which is not being delivered on. I think if the government wants to convince Australians that this is value for money, they should simply be transparent and upfront.
So the argument around COVID-19 being too big a risk, is that fair enough?
They're not my words.
No, I know.
I think you should be asking Scott Morrison that.
I know, he's not on the show though, you are.
Scott Morrison that. No, well, maybe he should be. That'd be good, wouldn't it? My point is that if that's good enough for Senator Corman, why is a different standard being applied to Australians who are currently stranded overseas?
So
and
broadly,
I think people want to hear that. There may be an answer to that. There may be an answer to that, and it's an answer the government should give you.
Is it in our national interest for an Australian to become the next head of the OECD?
Yes, it is. I mean, that's why we've taken the decision, as I said in answer to you previously, a decision that is a decision by an opposition that shows some maturity and some focus on the national interest over partisanship to support Matthias Corman's bid for this position. We have different views, but it is in our interest. I mean, again, it was disappointing or extraordinary, actually, that the Abbott opposition opposed Australia's bid for the Security Council. These are matters that should be beyond domestic partisanship, and we've shown that we're prepared to do that.
Is it appropriate for Greens MPs to lobby against Matthias Corman's appointment over the Coalition's record on climate change?
Well, you can. Mr. Band can explain why, and I'm sure, there are many Australians who share my concern and Labor's concern with the behaviour of this government when it comes to climate. I think I would rather continue to advocate for a Labor government that would deliver action on climate. I mean, it's been extraordinary, hasn't it? We've seen a US election with the most ambitious policy on climate ever put forward by a presidential candidate, and that really has served to underline just how isolated Australia is on this. I would say this: if former Senator Corman does not succeed in his bid, I would venture this view, which is that the fact that Scott Morrison has been so isolated on climate, refused to be part of the solution, simply continues to be part of the problem, that'd be a big reason why.
You've mentioned the Australians trying to get home. Do you believe all Australians will be home by Christmas, particularly given the additional restrictions on hotel quarantine?
Tomorrow we have another Senate Select Committee which will hear evidence from departments and some stranded Australians, and we will get a better handle on what the current status is. What I can tell you from the numbers we've seen to date is the numbers are all going the wrong way, and that the only thing that has really happened since Scott Morrison made yet that announcement was that the number of people trying to get home has increased. So, in fact, more people are stranded than when he made the announcement that people will be home by Christmas. Now, he'll try and get out of it, as he always does. He'll try and say, I didn't mean everybody, I just meant the vulnerable people. Well, we'll get to a chance tomorrow to listen to what departments have to say on it and to see whether the Prime Minister's announcement turns out to be as hollow as so many of his previous announcements.
So is it time now to explore other options outside of city hotel quarantining, not only because hotel quarantining has proven perhaps to be quite vulnerable, but also to maximise those numbers?
Oh, well, look, we've said this for some time. And it's not just Labor that's said this for some time, that the Commonwealth needed to step up and take some federal responsibility for quarantine. One of the government's own hand-picked advisors, Jane Holton, who undertook a review, did make a recommendation about greater federal involvement in quarantine. I mean, the reality is Scott Morrison could show some leadership here. He's left it to the states, and there have been some pretty dreadful consequences of some of what has occurred. But more importantly, there hasn't been federal leadership, and we've seen more people stranded overseas and problems in some of the state-run facilities.
What did you make of the Prime Minister's article in the Australian Financial Review arguing that China and the US both need to respect our decision not to pick sides? Well,
if you've read or heard anything I've said over the last year, I've said for some time we shouldn't let our foreign policy be defined by the strategic competition between the US and China. We should be looking to building the region that we want. The reality is our region is being reshaped, in part by strategic competition, in part also by the pandemic and by climate change. This strategic change is something we have to take responsibility for. Australia has to be more self-reliant and more ambitious. We shouldn't allow our foreign policy to be entirely defined by competition between the United States and China. I think the way I phrased it was, when people say there's a choice, I say, well, we've already made a choice. We're a US ally, but that's not the end of the matter.
Do you think the Prime Minister's words will have an effect on Beijing?
Well, I think, China observes very carefully the discussion in Australia. But really, the resolution to the challenges that we face in the bilateral relationship with China really have to be resolved at the leadership level. And John Howard put it pretty clearly. He said, we have to this has to be dealt with between President Xi and Prime Minister Morrison. It needs to be resolved at that level. I would say this: we've seen ongoing trade disputation. We've seen many jobs. There are many people whose jobs and livelihoods depend on a productive trading relationship with China, a productive relationship with China, and there's a fair way to go before those people have confidence in the Prime Minister's leadership on this issue. I mean, there seems to have been a bit of a view about there's nothing to see here. Well, we know there are challenges, and the Prime Minister should take former Prime Minister John Howard's advice and seek to resolve them at leadership level.
Do you welcome the decision by Qatari authorities to charge the airport security officials who conducted those invasive medical examinations of women at Doha Airport?
Look, I think that the people who engaged in these actions should be held to account, and justice should be done and be seen to be done. And I think that is what the women who experienced such a went through a horrific experience expect and deserve. I have been disappointed by the response of Senator Payne, the Foreign Minister, and the government more generally. They didn't act till this became public. As you know, Senator Payne didn't call her counterpart until until she was asked to, and it was suggested to her she should publicly by me and by the opposition when Parliament was sitting. And I'm also disappointed by the lack of support these women feel they received from the government. In fact, phone calls reported not to have been made until the minister indicated that they would provide help. And really, given the horrific experience these women went through, I would have hoped we would have seen more empathy and more private and public support from the Australian government.
Penny Wong, thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Good to speak with you, Patricia.